This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
You couldn't play Gwent physically anymore.
New hot freelancers or any designer that is fulsome in their power. This is the beginning of their career, and they're like, my God, I can do all this stuff. It's like, yeah, so you better not.
Where they revealed a bit more about Project Sigil. They used the term toyetic.
Did they literally say that out loud?
Like, you can have Optimus Prime fight Drizzt, it'll be great.
Can I say the F word on here?
And that's why when we go to the Wizards website and they are hiring monetization engineers,
Yep.
Play anything on here, Lord, please.
Shawn, do you have any interest in Sigil in terms of like using it?
No.
Yeah, the common wisdom is that that's what brought down TSR. I think that
Cool.
common wisdom needs to be re-examined a little bit. But the notion that each of these worlds was a product line.
Well, it won't be the last Forgotten Realms product because of their deal with Ed Greenwood, where if they don't release a product, he gets the Forgotten Realms back.
Uh-huh.
All that and more right now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG and dark fantasy podcast in all the realms. That's right. This is the place you go when you want to have fun, but also reflect on the nature of humanity. My name is Ben Byrne, and I am joined, as always, by Shawn Merwin. James Hake not feeling well this week. Dale Kingsmill moving house. So we have Matt Colville joining us. Matt, thank you.
No
for
worries.
jumping online.
Happy to sub in. We were supposed to get together at Gen Con, but neither James nor I were there for different reasons. And so we are happy to make it up to you.
No, I mean, making it up to me completely not necessary, but I appreciate you making the time nonetheless. I do have a question for you, though, and I think as someone who has worked both in the video game and the tabletop RPG industries, the gaming industry at large, you might have an interesting take on this, is how do you feel, and I'm not necessarily talking about Project Sigil here, but how do you feel about the continued kind of merging of digital technology into the tabletop space?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that I'm a lot more bullish on it than a lot of my contemporaries, and that has a little to do with my age. Shawn might have had the same experience that I've had, where there was an era, and it was not a brief time, where if someone showed up to your in-person gaming table with a laptop, for instance, it was their new toy, right? They just got a laptop and they were excited because they assumed that it was going to drastically increase their experience at the table, and it didn't. There was no tools. Maybe they had a PDF or something, and you just sit there waiting for them to realize that they are slowing everything down, right? And so people, this would have been like early 2000s up to like I would say about 2008. And so you learn that like it's a distraction. What are you doing? Right. But that was, 16 years ago, and things are super different now. And I have run D&D, for instance, 5th edition, for friends of mine, like my friend Phil, who his character only lives on D&D Beyond. That's where he makes his character. And he likes that. He likes the fact that it's got all the rules in it. He doesn't have to worry. It lets him build characters and share them and stuff. Some percentage of everyone's consciousness is stored online. Right. One way or the other, however you look at it, you look rules up online. We were just playing Robo Rally the other day and I couldn't find the rule book. So everybody just took out their phone and started looking up the rules. And it wouldn't occur to anybody at the table to be like, put your phone away. Right. That's like, what are you talking about? And I do think that there are players who find analog in-person players who they pull out their phone when they're bored. And then everybody associates using any digital device as anathema. But the reality is, and I've been saying this for years now, there are way more people who want to play whatever the game is you're making. There are way more people who want to play D&D than have access to people in their life. Like, I'm incredibly lucky, and I always have been, because I started as a professional dev when I was 25, right? So every job I've had, I was surrounded by nerds. If I wanted to get a game of whatever going, I didn't have to go anywhere. They were in the calls were coming from inside the house. I have like 30, 60 people that I can just say, hey, let's play. Most people do not have that experience. I would say that's often true of the people making the game, right? They know a ton of nerds around them, but their players do not. Their players are in the middle of Idaho or something, right? And they're the only nerd they know in real life. And so having digital tools, having something like a virtual tabletop, I think is the only way to allow anyone to play whatever they want, sort of whenever they want to do it. The downside is, as I see it, there are some tabletops, and I don't know why it should be like this, because it's not true of all of them, there are some digital tools that are sort of like regulatory capture. Like they get players in their ecology, and the players don't even realize this. The players they no longer see themselves as customers of the people making the game. So let's use D&D as an example. They no longer see themselves as D&D players or customers of Wizards of the Coast. They see themselves as customers of this VTT. And that, to me, creates this somewhat unhealthy tension in the player and in the marketplace.
I feel like I had a truncated version of your experience, Matt, where the first time, and I've talked about this on the Lorecast before, somebody rocked up at our table with their phone or their tablet to run their character sheet through D&D Beyond. We laughed and laughed at them. We thought it was hilarious. And it was like, all right, make a wisdom saving throw. And they had to tap through the app to figure out where their, wisdom save was. And they're like scrolling. And we were like, come on, man, just use a character sheet. It's much quicker, much more convenient. And now I think most of our table uses D&D Beyond as an accessibility tool, as I've talked about for my wife before. She finds the character sheet for whatever reason difficult to kind of navigate, but D&D Beyond kind of explains things to her a little bit clearer, and so she's able to use it more accessibly.
And it's like that with any business, with any endeavor. The technology comes, and then you try to figure out how to use that technology. Yeah. My wife has been a teacher for 30 years, and all of this new technology she's had to adapt. And you always get these early adopters who are rightfully gung-ho about it.
Yep.
But at forever, the technology is getting in the way of education, not facilitating education, until you have that period of time where people learn how to use it for its best purposes and get rid of its worst.
Well, and ideally, the software gets better over time. I mean, we are now in the era of enshrification, where sort of first time in living memory, the software is getting worse in many cases. But that is an exception. Normally, the software gets better. I will say that sometimes you get in the vein of my comment about VTT loyalists. You often get software that is for a specific kind of user, where, for instance, my early experience with D&D Beyond was, well, this is sort of useless because it will only, this is very early on when it first debuted, it will only let you make a character in a specific order because it is designed for people that are new and have never made a character before. It's like, well, but we are used to, and the funny thing is, when D&D Beyond started, everyone I knew used digital tools to make their character. It was usually Excel. It was usually a giant Excel sheet that somebody else made, thank God. I didn't know what the name of it is. I called it the executive character sheet. And it just had all the information in it, and you could make a character in whatever order you wanted. So then going to these digital tools, the official digital tools, seemed like a step backward to us. Now I think it's much more advanced and and caters to many different players. But I guess I'm also skeptical of that kind of one true way-ism. We're making our own VTT because we think we're in the best position to cater to our community, right? But the game is open. Anybody can take our game and put that data in a VTT. Good. We like that. We like the idea that if our solution isn't the best for you, well, there's dozens of other solutions. Knock yourself out.
Exactly. Play the way you want. Do what you need to do to play the game in the way that best suits you, your group, etc. What I always keep an eye on is the tabletop role-playing game rules being made worse because of the need to put it in a digital format. And and some people just say that automatically without thinking. They're like, oh, they're doing it this way because of the VTT. And sometimes they may be right, but they do so without really truly examining. But you do have to be vigilant about that, because at that point, then it does become something different. It does become something different than a group of friends sitting at the table, laughing, sharing stories. So,
well, listen, we had that problem with our game, not to name names of the game, but we had that same problem where it's really easy. And I believe I have detected this from Seattle as well. It seems like it's getting harder and harder for professional developers to remember that the game still has to work analogically at the table. And so I see statements coming out of Seattle like, well, your dungeon master is going to hate this, but you're going to love it. Right. And it's like, wait, what are you doing? If we have these tools, shouldn't they be making it easier? Right. Why? In other words, what they're doing is, and this is classic nonsense. It's like feature creep. They're now that people have digital tools, the people making the game, and this is not unique to any one game, it happened on my team. They start designing a game that assumes the existence of the digital tools. Right. And it's like, no. I'm so glad the team went to Gen Con and ran our game analogly, right? All the designers are there running the game. And not only are they running the game analogly several times a day for several days, we had other people at the show who were volunteers that we flew out there who aren't designers on the dev team sitting at other tables within arm's reach of them doing the same thing. And when they came back, they were like, oh my God, we really have to simplify this game. I'm like, yes,
sure.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Because it still has to work at the table analogly.
That's the most important thing you can do as a developer is get out there and run the game for strangers.
Oh yeah.
And we've said that for years and years. And sometimes the Seattle company is great about it. And sometimes they get in a little bit of a ivory tower sort of mindset.
Well, I mean, I guess it's kind of it's their privilege to be ivory tower. If you've got them by the balls, their hearts and minds will follow. Right. So
it's interesting as someone who's kind of newer coming into the publishing space as well, at least on the scale that we're working at. I'm confounded sometimes as a game designer by simple things that don't necessarily have to do with digital tools, but still place limitations upon the game design itself. Because publishing on DM's Guild, just self-publishing, doing that sort of thing, drive-through RPG, whatever, I write as many words as the story takes to tell for a dungeon master to be able to use it. But now I'm being told things like, that needs to fit within like 32 pages, no more, no less, because, in case we print it. Or, the rules need to fit in case they go, like, we want to create cards, or we want to, there's these publication limitations that are going to influence your game design. And in one sense, I don't necessarily see the difference between that and having limitations placed upon the game design based on making it work for digital tools, except for what you just said, Matt, which is you couldn't play Gwent physically anymore because that game as a card game got so designed in a direction that you just
like Hearthstone,
it wouldn't work. Yeah,
like
exactly.
Hearthstone's a game that could only exist digitally which is good because it's not a digital version of an analog thing. I think that so what you're talking about to me is just there are two different versions of the same problem, which is there's a big difference between the kind of game that you can write and the kind of game that you can fit in a book that has to be published, the kind of game that has to be run at a table. Like it's real easy. It's super easy for us. Go look at Kingdoms and Warfare. Go look at the monsters in Kingdoms and Warfare. Holy shit, right? Some of them are, a single monster is 2 pages big. And, the people who can handle that, they loved it, right? But that's 3% of the audience, right? It's such overload. And we learned from that. And that didn't have anything to do with digital versus analog, right? That was literally just any endeavor like this, unless you are a purely digital product like Hearthstone, any endeavor like this has constraints. The constraints of the page count, the constraints of the layout, the constraints of readability, right? Not everybody, some people are reading on screens, some people are reading printouts. Not everybody has a computer sitting by to run the game for them. And the good news is, I think those constraints are where creativity comes from. When we listen to this feedback and we go, my God, we've grossly over-designed this, right? And we bring everything way, way, way back. The audience, they love it. They're like, oh my God, this is so much better. And it's just up to us to find ways to take that same, this is what it's all about, right? To take that same flavor and find a way to express it in a simpler manner. And I think you can always do that. This happens with freelancers we deal with all the time, especially new hot freelancers that are, or any designer that is fulsome in their power. This is the beginning of their career. And they're like, my God, I can do all this stuff. It's like, yeah, so you better not. Right? Because the fact that you can do it, the fact that you can write it is not the same as they can run it. Right. So I think that's just part and parcel of like being a professional in this industry, is understanding your players and understanding all that. This is and to a certain, like if Willie Abil were here, he would say it's a UX problem. Right? It's all about understanding your players, understanding the use case is the language that they use. Right? How will this be used at the table? Right? And if you don't have that in your head while you're writing, then you're doomed. I mean, I worked with a dude who was a legendary writer designer, and he would write 5,000 words a day, and he prided himself on that. And meanwhile, his editors, who were my coworkers, were like, yeah, but it takes us 4 days to edit his 5,000 words down into something legible. Right. And that was another problem with the digital tool. If he had to do that on a typewriter, guess what? it would be 1,200 words, right? But he had a word processor, and all of a sudden there's a giant bloat. Anyway, blah. I also feel like there's a lot of tension between. Sorry, I'm going to monologue for a second. Between we see this all the time. People imagine that like video games and role playing games are somehow like matter and antimatter. Right? That they are cultural enemies of one another. And I'm like, that is ahistorical. I want to break the back of that problem. Video games and role-playing games are almost exactly the same age. 1974 Pong, 1974 D&D. And the earliest video games, the earliest 1970s on a disc video games were people trying to do D&D nonsense, in the video games. We should use all the tools that are available to us, but you just got to keep your audience in mind. You just got to remember who's going to play this game and where they're going to play it.
And hence the need to go to conventions and run games for strangers.
You have to play your game. Step one, right? You have to play your game with not just your friends that you've been playing with forever. Go to the local game store. They would, by the way, hey, anybody out there who's an independent designer and is thinking about doing this, if you have a local game store, I bet they would love it if you ran your new game for them. Because it's just an event that's going to get people in the store. Put up a little poster, a little 8.5 by 11 flyer, and people will come and run it for strangers. There was a great white paper that the designers on Halo, this is, 24 years ago, published, right, on their encounter design. And they're like, we grossly overestimated how smart our players were. Our players they're idiots. They're stupid, right? What we had to there was all this behavior that they built into their AI, right? And they had to crush it all down to the simplest, most obvious stuff, because in the heat of battle, at the table throwing dice, your brain isn't picking up on all these subtleties and stuff like that. And that experience, it happened on a video game I worked on called Evolve. Evolve was a 4v1 game. One player gets to play the boss monster. And we thought that was the fun of the game, is you, the monster, you get to be the boss in a video game. You know all those dope ass powers that the boss in a World of Warcraft raid has? What if you had those powers? And we thought that was going to be hugely empowering. First public play test, what happens? The players playing the monster were like, I was terrified. We're like, what? Why? I'm like, because there's 4 other humans coming after me. And we're like, oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, you're right. Right. We thought it was going to be like, you get to be King Kong, you get to be Godzilla, but it doesn't matter if you're literally outnumbered by other human brains that are chasing you down. It was terrifying. Anyway.
Taking a step back, let's into last week. Let's go back to the D&D Direct, where they revealed a bit more about Project Sigil. It's an interesting thing because it seems cool to me, but very specifically not to play D&D, which they kind of called out in that they used the term toyetic. They want it to be toyetic.
Did they literally say that out loud?
They said that out loud. Yeah, in the Direct.
They being a person. Not
thank you.
The whole all of Hasbro did not speak. It was
it
one
was a term
individual.
that kind of slipped in there and jumped out at me. It's not like they were repeating.
It jumped out at me too. I went, don't say that.
So for people watching, by the way, toyetic is a term used by the marketing wankers, right? And it is a term the marketing folks develop on purpose. When they are in charge of a creative, they have some amount of control over some creative endeavor, be it a movie or a TV show. And what they're doing is they're telling the creative people, hey, make sure whatever else you're doing, there are toys in it we can sell.
Sure.
Right? Toyetic is the property of a creative work that means it can be sold to children as toys.
Or adults.
Because I took it without being particularly familiar with the word, but the term, it's kind of ties to toys jumping out at me as, like war games.
Yeah.
To use the term as I took it, are toyetic in the way that they are fundamentally, they're played by adults or teenagers mostly, but they have a toy-like kind of vibe to them, and adults will depreciate themselves by saying like, oh, I'm playing with my toy soldiers, whatever. And they said as well themselves that they've used Sigil to play games other than D&D. I think they said at Gen Con, I heard someone say they'd set up a chessboard in it and just played chess in Sigil.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but that does not mean that their software knows what chess is. Right?
No, exactly.
Right,
it's just a toolbox.
Yeah,
instantly I thought to myself, I was like,
yeah,
exactly. I was like, I'm trying to at the moment decide, and this is misleading. Nothing to do with anything, but I'm trying to decide whether to play Frostgrave, Yafsiga,
Yeah.
or any of these little war games. Create a little table, make miniatures. Which miniatures do I want to buy to set up a table and play this game? And looking at Sigil, I was like, I could set up a 4x4 foot, table on there and it would look sick. And we could use miniatures or even like the imported flat assets and just play war games in this thing.
Yeah,
and I'm sure it would
like
be
tabletop
sick,
simulator. There's actually,
yeah, exactly.
Or Vassal. There's already online frameworks for this stuff.
Well, the thing is, like, Tabletop Simulator has never scratched my itch particularly. I've never felt attracted to Tabletop Simulator. I think because it still feels a little bit, and this is not to throw dispersions on it, but it still feels a little bit taped together, or it still feels a little bit like lower poly than just playing with physical miniatures. It feels like a software from the 1990s. Yeah, exactly. Whereas this felt like a modern, like a tabletop that you would have in real life, but realized in 3D.
Do we know what Sigil's
Unreal.
Okay. Wow, okay.
They're talking, so it'll be PC initially, but they want to bring it to phones, consoles, and refrigerators.
Good luck with that. Good luck with D&D on your phone. I mean, I think when you hear that, like, we want to bring it to phones, I think that tells you a lot about who the speaker is. And what I would say is, like, this is not Wizards of the Coast first at bat when it comes to digital tools. It's really none of my business how they run their business. But what I would say is, if you're working on that project, if you hyper focus on the user experience and what your customers want, you will have success.
I can see this thing very much like, I think they're kind of like, yes, we built it for D&D, but I think they're going to spread their focus as Hasbro more than just Wizards, because they've already put Optimus Prime in this thing.
Yep.
And said, like, you can have Optimus Prime fight Drizzt, it'll be great.
I mean, can I say the F word on here?
Sure, why not?
Fortnite is what they want.
Right. Yes, exactly. Metaverse came into my head as soon as I saw Optimus Prime.
If you're not a game dev, if you have, like, that's what all of these financialized companies are all chasing. They're all chasing that Fortnite experience, right? And they're all trying to find ways that they can bring brands into their virtual space. That's what they all want. Because that's where that's where they're hoping they're going to get 10x or even 100x. Well, that's because Fortnite Epic had that 100x return. I don't think that's available anymore, but good luck to you.
And that's why when we go to the Wizards website and they are hiring monetization engineers, they're several $1 million into this VTT, and now they're trying to figure out what to do with it. So focus will naturally have to shift from play your D&D game on here to play anything on here, Lord, please.
I've banged this gong now for years. If you know who is in charge, and I mean literally the owners, then I think you will have you can tell whether or not you're going to like a project even before it's done or it's out, right? Like, if you know who that person is in charge, who the owner is, then you can sort of think, well, what else did they do? What are their priorities? What are they like? Do I like those things? But when it's a publicly traded company, they are chasing a return on investment. Like for us, we have a VTT that's in development called the Codex. I like that name. It might change. I don't think it will. The Codex only needs to make more money than it costs to maintain. And we don't know how much that is, but it's not going to be nothing. But it does not have to return on investment above it. We don't have any investors to make happy. And so that's the trick, is that you got to think about, well, what are they trying to do with this VTT? Well, the answer is determined by who's in charge. Who is literally in charge? Who holds the purse strings?
Shawn, do you have any interest in Sigil in terms of, like, using it?
No. Personally, I play this game to interact with people face to face. If I am forced to by, say, a pandemic, I will learn to use whatever tools are the least necessary to get that experience across. So I did use Roll20 during the pandemic, had a great time, loved it. When Maps came out, I thought, this is what I really wanted, right? I want something where I can move a token around and other people can see that token being moved.
Yeah, Owlbear Rodeo. Yeah.
Right, Owlbear Rodeo, Maps. That's what I want. But again, who am I to tell other people what they want? So if this virtual tabletop is what excites you and your players, then I want that to be there for people to use.
There was a virtual tabletop that is pretty Byzantine and not user friendly, but that I invested the time to kind of figure out. I don't think normal dungeon masters are aware of how much time they spend at the table with their players, and I'm talking about in person, going, okay, you miss. Well, what do you mean I missed? I hit with this result last time. Well, what do you mean? You told me you got an 8. Well, an eight misses. Oh, no. I rolled an 8. Hang on. I got a 16. Okay. Then you hit. How much damage did you do? Well, I told you how much damage I did. Yeah, but that's back when you rolled. I thought you rolled an 8. Okay. Let me do it again. Hang on a minute. I think I did 13 damage. Okay. Well, why isn't he dead? Well, what do you mean? Why isn't he dead? Well, he's the one I attacked last time. No, that one moved. This is a different one who's fresh. Well, then I would have, right. And oh my God. And I've used virtual tabletops that fix all of that. I can even, when it's my player's turn, I can get up and go get a slice of pizza because all they're doing is selecting they're not role playing in this moment. All they're doing is selecting a bad guy, rolling some dice, making some checks. Is this number bigger than that number? And then the VTT can tell you hit. Mm-hmm. The VTT can tell you, oh, you're doing fire damage and this monster has fire resistance. And therefore the damage is reduced this much. And you ain't got to remember none of that. Mm-hmm. Right. That is huge. I was like, I wish I could give, this is one of the big reasons that it was so important to me that we did our own VTT. I'm like, I want to give everyone that experience. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And in many ways, not always, but in many ways, I thought it was a better experience because of all of the bookkeeping. And I'm like, role-playing games are not about this. They are not about the difference between a 17 and a 15. That is not what an RPG is about, right? Get all that stuff out of the way and let me play my character. Let me fight these monsters. Let me role play. Anyway, you get it.
I also love let's pick on Steve because Steve can't roll 2d4s and add them together and add 3.
Yeah.
That's what I need on my Friday night is just to poke fun at Steve for 10 or 15 minutes.
I have some friends in LA and I was having dinner with them and I raised this issue of, it's stupid that there are people who they've been playing for 10 years and they still don't know which one a D8 is. And they thought I was making fun of them. And I'm like, you don't understand. Why should you have to remember which one a D8 is? Why not just color it red and call it the attack die? Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. Or the damage die or the light damage die. You could do that in D&D. You could have the D6, the D8, the D10, the light, medium, and heavy damage die and give them different colors, right? Why is it like this? And the VTT can fix all of that. So that kind of slavish devotion to the 1970s, which is how I was raised, where you are expected to know the difference between all these, this very weird language, 2D8, 1D4, stuff like that. It's like the game can handle all that, man. Role-playing is not about the difference between a D8 and a D10.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with all of that. The flip side for VTTs for me, and the reason I don't think I'll use this for role-playing games, Sigil, or any other VTT, to be honest, for role-playing games specifically, is kind of what Shawn was saying before in terms of when does technology help and when does it get in the way. Yeah. The thing that dungeon masters have to do increasingly if they're using VTTs, at least I feel, you can do some cool things like I've used Fog of War before. Yeah. To Fog of War an item to block a passage so the party thought it was a wall and then you reveal and it's actually a Fog of War, a passage awesome. And it's cool, and it creates a feel cool moment. But there was effort that went into that. Yeah. That wasn't me writing the adventure, or working out what I wanted to actually happen in the session. And so using a VTT to that fidelity starts to feel like it's doubling the prep time that I have as a GM. And so that's what makes it unattractive. And that's why ultimately I think Sigil probably won't be worth it for me session to session and I'm just speaking personally here, but it's that additional time outside of the table.
If they do it right, you should not have to do that time. You should not have to do that time. Well, spend that time because the worst case scenario is other community members are doing it for you and they're uploading maps that already have all that stuff built into it and you're just grabbing it and using it. So here's an example of where I think the virtual tabletop can really enhance the experience. And I mean, not just in terms of bookkeeping, but actual create new role-playing moments. And that is Fog of War. You have moved your character, or you have vision. This happened in Dusk. It happened several times in Dusk, which Dale was a player in, where someone would be, because of the vision their characters had, or because of their literal position on the map, they go, oh my God. And everyone else in the group would go, what? And they would have to describe, now it's up to them if they do it in character or not, what their character can see that these other players can't. At the table, you can do that, but it's mostly going to be, we're all looking at the same table anyway, right? So you having that knowledge, we're all looking at the same minis, you're just role-playing it, but this is real. And it was, I hesitate to use the word, it was immersive. right? And sometimes like the players would express this knowledge in character. And that's where it was like, this is awesome. I love this, right? So I think that virtual tabletops, look, I also love playing in person. However, if I want to play with either of you two, guess what? We need to use a VTT, right? If I want to play with Dale, we had to use a VTT. I've got lots of friends of mine. This is, I think, I would say this is true of most people who are interested in D&D. They have friends that are online and they want to play. Let them. But now, mind you can do that with Owlbear Rodeo, right? But to me, that's a slippery slope. Once you're in Owlbear Rodeo, you're like, God, it'd be nice if this game understood how our dice worked.
Sure,
right?
Yeah. And just to kind of get it in there, they did mention that this will plug into D&D Beyond. I think that anybody who's got a D&D Beyond subscription is going to get to try it for free later this year in the closed beta. Yippee. And so there will be some of that automation there in terms of like click, my character casts the spell, and there might be a cute little animation that kind of goes along with that. What's most exciting for me about Project Sigil isn't using it for D&D. It's kind of using it for those, other use cases that I think they're going to expand into. What I'm curious about is what other dice are in there? Are all the dice in there? In which case, can I just play Infinity by rolling D20s and nothing else? Or could I just play, Call of Cthulhu or draw a steel by just picking which dice I want to roll and physically roll them in the VTT?
I think that's what they would like, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's really hard at a company like that to sell people on a digital initiative like that if it is only for your game. It's a lot easier to sell if you can tell the money people, hey, we can have all of these games in here. We can get all of these customers in here.
Here's a tabletop RPG adjacent question then that you might have some insight into, Matt, which is Hasbro increasingly want to move into video game development. They have studios beneath them that are developing video games, and they've expressed that idea. Can you see, it's developed in Unreal, so it's not an engine unto itself as a very lay person talking about video game development, but can you see Sigil being used by their video game studios to level design, to level build, to create, experiences that are kind of sold separately to the VTT itself?
If they were forced to, yeah, they probably would. They would have to design it that way from the ground up. Yeah, it would probably work. The thing is, 3D assets are, especially in this day and age, 3D assets, there are marketplaces online where you can just go buy 3D assets for Unreal.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's nothing stopping somebody who's making as long as they were doing, and it wouldn't even necessarily have to be an Unreal, but it would be easier if it was somebody making a D&D video game in Unreal and be able to export that level as a Sigil level. My guess is it would not be free, right? It would, but the more they future-proof their design. In other words, if they knew now while they're building Sigil from scratch, that is something they wanted and they hired the right people, those people could make sure that, it's basically like any other handoff. You would need both teams to understand the needs of the other. And that doesn't usually work. One of those teams is going to think they're the important one,
sure.
Right? But yeah, it's possible.
The one other thing they kind of showed, which I thought was interesting apart from Optimus Prime, was the Mini Maker, which looks very kind of Hero Forge-ish, but with a slightly different aesthetic, I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know, look cool. I wonder, there's the other question, and they're probably thinking it themselves, and somebody pointed it out and they went, oh, that's a good point. Maybe we should do that. Is like, could this software be used by 3D printers, like people who want to play D&D physically at the table? Can they print their minis? And kind of take them.
It should be possible, right? It does not go in the other direction, but it should go in that. Like if you have a 3D model, so like, a lot of people working on video games, the 3D model is one step in a process that will later on include what's called an animation rig, which is sort of like a skeleton, right? Sure. And so looking at Hero Forge. As far as I can tell, Hero Forge does not have anything like a skeleton. It's a pure paper doll mix and match thing. But then you look at, I think is it Titan Forge? There's another company that kind of does what Hero Forge does. But you can see on their models that you can pose things like the wrist, right? I don't know if people can see my hand, right? You can pose the wrist. And when I look at that, I'm like, oh, there's a rig in there, right? Well, if it's a 3D model, you should be able to 3D print it. Right. But it doesn't necessarily work in the other direction just because something. So I think they could probably do it. I don't know what the market is for that. We'll see. Actually, it seems to me like it That would be a little weird though, right? Because how many people using Sigil want a physical 3D model of their mini? They're playing on a virtual tabletop, right? So I don't know.
And how many of Wizards partners who make minis want other people just making their own minis and not buying their minis?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they could, if they wanted to take their tech and launch a Hero Forge like site, they could do that, but it's not exactly free.
Well, jumping through the other D&D Direct news, they talked about, and kind of, I'm going to stick more to the tabletop specific stuff as opposed to the merchandising stuff they announced. Yay, more Lego minifigures. I mean, you can use those for miniatures if you want instead. But other than that, they've run through the releases for next year post the 2024 update/2025 update coming out. We've got a dragon anthology of 10 short adventures featuring dragons in dungeons coming in summer. Does that tickle anyone's fancy?
I love short adventures.
Yeah,
I love me a big epic, and I also love me some short adventures, especially with dragons and especially in dungeons. So I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah, raise your hand if you remember a product called the Draconomicon. That was awesome. That was an awesome book. You know, it was I thought it was an amazing book. It was like everything you need to know about dragons. Here's how to play a dragon PC. Here's it's kind of like the way my company would do it, right? Here's 20 levels of different dragons you can fight and unique dragon hordes, right? And I was like, man, this is good. This is awesome. So more of that, please. Yeah, absolutely. I think that stuff's great.
I love their anthology books as well. Like I used Tales from the Yawning Portal because the reason I love these is because they're relatively easy adventures to kind of drag and drop into your pre-existing campaign so that if you're running, you know, Grim Hollow or any other setting that's not the Forgotten Realms or not Greyhawk, or if you are running the Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk, wherever these adventures will be set, presumably Greyhawk, right? You can click and kind of drop, and if you're like, I want them to fight a black dragon, here's an adventure that features a black dragon, so I don't have to, you know, do that heavy mental load myself of figuring out where to put a black dragon. It's all kind of there for you. So I think that'll be a cool product and very usable for folks. Then they have a new starter set, which is going to be based on Keep on the Borderlands, with 3 locations: the Keep, the Borderlands, surprise, and the Caves of Chaos, which will be coming fall 2025.
That's what they should be doing.
It will be the next generation's Lost Mines of Phandelver, I hope.
Well, they should have done Keep on the Borderlands instead of Lost Mines of Phandelver. Like, that's the whole point of the D&D brand. Keep on the Borderlands is a great adventure. Update it to the modern game, modern player expectations, make it a modern product. But that's what people want from D&D is they want to go through the Temple of Elemental Evil. It's the reason they're playing D&D. They want to fight gelatinous cubes and stuff like that. Other games, there's lots of role-playing games. Only D&D has, you know, gelatinous cubes and mimics and stuff like that. And that's what they want. So from my point of view, there's not a lot of point in them making wholly new and original stuff. They're a legacy brand. That's what people love about it, right? So if people want new original stuff, that's what the OGL's for. You know, there's lots of companies making new. Ghostfire Games makes tons of new, awesome original shit. So to me, that's exactly what they should be doing: is updating that old stuff. Because if you put the work into it to update it, it can still be super awesome.
And in this case, make it an actual starter set and not an adventure that you better be a really good DM if you want to actually use this. To
I was sort of blown away by how just huge Phandelver was. I'm like, this is a big adventure from my point of view. For a starter. Think about it. This is the secret, and they should know this. The secret of starter adventures, and this is something that we're dealing with, is like make it unusually short, right? So that the players have some experience of we finished something. We finished something and we got rewarded for finishing it, and we want to play again. And then later on, those same players will be perfectly willing to soak 8 months into one adventure, but not new players, not at the beginning. Get something finished under their belt so they feel a sense of accomplishment, achievement, and they're looking forward to doing more.
I mean, look, for the record, as someone who is of the Phandelver generation, that was the first adventure I ran, or a version thereof, where I, brutalized it and put it in a different world.
Yeah.
But I loved Phandelver. DMing for me was like a duck to water, and that's not intended as a brag. That's just, it uses the skills that I already have.
I know
exactly.
Yeah.
But I get the sense this will probably be a pretty similar product to Phandelver ultimately, particularly.
Yeah.
And I don't know anything on the inside. It's just a comment they made during the direct, which was, I think they said the Caves of Chaos are intended to be a location where the party can go to adventure and then return to. And so I get the sense that they're going to build whether it's the size of Wave Echo Cave or bigger, I get the sense that they're creating a large adventure space that the players can kind of, mine for adventure again and again.
That was a big part of the 70s game, was the notion of having to retreat, right? The idea that the dungeon is the dungeon. And it's up to you, the players, to recognize when you were overwhelmed, and it's time to go back to town and maybe listen to some rumors and see what else is going on. And then you do some other short adventure, level up, and now you're ready to go back to the Caves of Chaos. I think that's a great style of play. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
And then last but not least, in this kind of lineup, they mentioned 2 books they're doing, which I think is hilarious, honestly. Forgotten Realms Player's Guide and the Forgotten Realms Campaign Guide, because they've moved the core setting to Greyhawk, and their first releases are a campaign guide and a setting guide for the Forgotten Realms.
This seems like a big deal to me. This seems like a major sea change.
What I very quickly like about the way they're approaching the campaign guide, I've been known to be pretty critical of the realms just for myself, because it's kind of that thing where you take every color and you mix it on the palette and then it just looks brown. And that's what the realms has been to me.
Completely agree.
I feel a lot more affectionate towards the realms, having met Ed Greenwood at Gen Con, and kind of feeling his passion for the realms kind of filled me with a little bit like, oh, maybe they're not so bad. But the way that they're describing the campaign guide, is like they're trying to separate the colors out a little bit so that each kind of area of the realms provides you with a specific type of adventure. They talk about, if you want horror, go to Icewind Dale. If you want urban adventure, there's going to be a chapter on Baldur's Gate.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Which I think is great to kind of show people lots of different types of adventure, and then they can decide, if they like Icewind Dale, maybe they'll like Valika. In terms of, what path they want to go further down, whether in the realms or some other adventure.
Yeah, part of me wonders if they thought, well, let's give Greyhawk as an example in the Dungeon Master's Guide, just for a little nostalgia and something that newer players haven't seen yet. And maybe we'll go further. Oh, wait, Baldur's Gate 3 and the movie. Okay, let's get these Forgotten Realms books out there as soon as possible.
I was going to do a video on this and I never got around to it. I think I might still have it in me. We'll see. But the folks running the show for 5th edition made a choice. And it was, they reduced the number of choices, or let's say books, a dungeon master was expected to buy from 4 down to 3. It used to be, if you came up in at least in the 80s and 90s, I don't know what it was like in the 70s. The 70s kind of predates this. If somebody said, hey, do you want to play D&D? To another D&D player, they would say, sure, in what campaign world? Because the assumption was you were going to buy the Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, and the Dungeon Master's Guide, and a 4th book. You were going to buy some campaign setting, or you were going to roll your own. But most Dungeon Masters started with some existing campaign setting, and it was their growing impatience with that campaign setting that would cause them to create their own perfectly natural character arc for a Dungeon Master. And so I felt like I was seeing the brand management decisions and going, no, that's too many books. That's too many books. That's too many books. Make the setting implied, right? And then you saw with all of their quote unquote setting products, they were basically big adventures. They were big adventures that sold you on the setting. And that was their way of kind of combining these things in one. So to me, seeing them go back to real campaign setting books, and it's not just one. I remember the 3rd edition Forgotten Realms book was epic. It was a single book and it was massive. And my memory was that it was beloved by the people that bought it. I think there was some, campaign settings as they advance, players get more upset with the changes the authors are making. That's natural. But they haven't done anything like that for 5th edition, as far as I could tell.
2 years ago, when they brought out the Spelljammer campaign guide, it felt like, and Dragonlance was like this as well, and Eberron as well. It felt like Spelljammer's back. And then 2 months after that release, it was like, spell what? Dragonlance. We're going back to, and hopefully, being 2 books, a player's guide and a campaign guide, this will feel a bit more like a bigger bite at the apple, like a way to immerse players in that world a little bit better than those kind of like buy it and then either play it or forget about it kind of campaign guide books that they had.
Well, that was what
the
common wisdom is that's what brought down TSR. I think that common wisdom needs to be re-examined a little bit. But the notion that each of these worlds was a product line. It wasn't just one and done. It wasn't like we're going to make one book that is is an adventure and a campaign guide and then move on. And so to me, seeing them go to the Forgotten Realms and do 2 entire hardcover books one just for players, one just for dungeon masters. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that, except I feel like, yeah, that's how it should have been all the time, right? Is it like either do it or don't, right? Don't screw around, because no one wants it half-assed, right? They don't. People want Dragonlance for real, right? They want that product line, right? And it's tricky to support that though. So we'll see what happens. Will this be the last 2 Forgotten Realms products? Will there be Dark Sun? Will there be? I don't know. I would love it if there were. That'd be great.
Well, it won't be the last Forgotten Realms product because of their deal with Ed Greenwood, where if they don't release a product, he gets the Forgotten Realms back. So we will always be seeing Forgotten Realms products until the end of eternity.
I don't have an opinion on. I do have opinions, but I don't think they're relevant about the quality of the Forgotten Realms as a campaign setting. I think if you and I don't have any opinion about the wisdom of this strategy financially. I'm only interested in the consumer experience. And this idea, as far as I can tell, is what they should have been doing the entire time. If you're going to do a setting, do it for real. Give the people what they want. And so seeing 2 big hardcover books, one for players, one for directors, I'm like, yep, let's have more of that.
Yeah. This is a little bit of offshoot now and just sort of what I would like to see. But what feels like could be a good strategy for this, because I'm thinking like these books come and go, right? And even though it's 2 books, what are they doing next? Are they doing Spelljammer? Are they going back to Greyhawk? And does that, the Forgotten Realms in theory, in this example, isn't continued to be served? What I would like to see, again, just personally, that might make these campaign settings feel like they're being fully developed, at least for a while, is like a year of releases, maybe 4 books, all for one setting, and it's the Spelljammer year, it's the Eberron year.
They used to make a book a month back in the early 2000s for 3rd edition. They could easily make an entire product line for Forgotten Realms in 1 year, right? That was more content that you could use in a lifetime of play. Right. And then move on to the next setting. They could absolutely do that. So as our general manager here at MCDM enjoys telling me, Matt, you have picked the hardest way to make money in all of games. Right. That's tabletop role playing. So a big part of being the Seattle company, so to speak, is they have to worry about what sells and how much things cost. How would you feel if you could have all of the settings that you love, whatever they are, what my favorite all-time D&D setting is? Birthright. Loved Birthright. I'm never going to see it again. They're never going to make another Birthright product, right? Well, how if you could have not only robust support, but ongoing new original stuff being made for your favorite setting, but it's only on the VTT, where it's easier to monetize. They don't have to print anything. They don't have to ship anything. They don't have to worry about game stores, right? So the cost of goods goes way, way, way down. The quality is still the same, but it's only on the VTT. How would that be?
It depends on the audience. It depends on your needs. If it's available on the VTT, but I can download the text so I could run it at my table, that's great. Sign me up. I'll sign up for that VTT. I'm not going to use it, but I will certainly use the content.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
And to be fair, I think that some of these settings do get served well with ongoing support, usually through, and I'm not a big user of this, so maybe it's not as there as I believe it is, but through, things like DM's Guild, where kind of third-party folks are creating content using the DM's Guild license. I know there's a bunch of, after Tomb of Annihilation came out, there's a bunch of stuff for Chult that kind of helped flesh out, because that hex crawl actually feels a little bit empty in Tomb of Annihilation because you can only fit so many words in a 250, 300 page book. And so some of those important locations on the map just have a paragraph that say like, there should be a dungeon here, make it up. And so I know that got served a lot on DM's Guild of people bringing out heaps of content. I think Ravenloft is kind of the same.
Yeah.
So that content is there. It's just not all necessarily coming from Wizards, which, hey, maybe that's a better kind of situation.
Is there going to be a Steam style marketplace in their new VTT?
They're definitely... I don't know about, I don't know what shape this will take, but they're definitely kind of hinting that they want to turn, they want to turn D&D Beyond and I think Project Sigil into a Steam-like platform, right? I think they would like D&D Beyond to become
normal people
the new
can make
DM's
and create
Guild
stuff and then sell it for money in their VTT. That's good. That is a good thing.
I think that'll probably come down to even just like they talked about modules, which is like if you need a mine, if you need a town, if you need a graveyard, here's a module that is a graveyard and there's a little adventure to go along with it, but you don't have to use that. It's just a set and go graveyard.
And they had to explain to people what modules were, didn't they? Didn't I read in their little announcement? I thought that was adorable.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
But if people can get in there and like create, I've created this specific graveyard, whether they're just using the level creation tools and then sell that online in an open marketplace for a couple of bucks, like that's cool. The Red Wizards of Thay adventure missing in action. They promised that last year. Not that, promised is maybe an overstrong word, but still yet to see it. Still yet to see the Venger adventure as well.
Wasn't there some nonsense with the Red Wizards of Thay and Baldur's Gate? Wasn't there some kind of, I feel like maybe I've got some inside baseball knowledge that I'm trying to dig up about how there was some tie into Baldur's Gate that was supposed to use the Red Wizards and then it didn't.
Yeah. They were going to, they I think like in a D&D Direct last year announced a Red Wizards of Thay adventure module, but they hadn't given it a title. They hadn't really given it anything else. And I believe you're right. I think they did say it would have some sort of Baldur's Gate tie-in. I think
it's very telling that Larian Games wants nothing to do with D&D now. I don't know what it tells. I literally don't know what it tells, but I think it bodes something that, anyway, that's not on the topic. But anyway.
Well, it might be, because speaking of wanting nothing to do with D&D now, quick announcement, Greg Tito.
That's right. Well done. What a transition. My God. If there was a transition award, you would get it. Yeah, that's amazing.
This award goes
why they pay me the big bucks. Yeah. Greg Tito, who, if you're not aware, previously was the head of communications at Wizards of the Coast. Has left the company and gone on to become the deputy. Now, this is a career change. The deputy director of external affairs for the Washington Secretary of State. So moving from the private sector across to the public sector. Congratulations, Greg Tito.
That's amazing. Yeah. I love seeing people getting involved in local politics in whatever capacity. I think that's great.
Go ahead, Shawn. The Secretary of State for Washington is a huge D&D player and has been featured in Wizards of the Coast's videos, extolling the virtues of role-playing games and hyping D&D. So I'm sure Greg dealt with
the world
this
has changed, man.
Person a lot.
And then we've got, what's the time? Let us do. Oh man, none of these are quick.
It's so funny. This is what happens when you invite Matt Colville on your podcast. Right? We're supposed to be,
we never get to the questions.
We were supposed
anyway.
to be done in half an hour. This is supposed to be half an hour. This market is an hour. Well, good. I like that. I'm glad I'm not breaking any rules then.
No, not at all. All right, let us go for the prescribed actions versus free actions. This comes from Shawn. Shawn emailed podcast@ghostfiregaming.com to ask this question, asking about how they're describing it, prescribed actions in RPGs versus free actions. And the differentiation they're making is that 5e kind of has prescribed actions. You have an action, you have a bonus action, you have a reaction, and particularly bonus action and reaction need to sort of be specific things. You have your movement as, a prescribed thing. You can't swap your movement for something else necessarily within the mechanics of the game. Versus free actions, using Pathfinder 2e as the example, where you have action points that can be spent freely, even on repeat actions. So I'm not familiar with the system. I know DC 20 kind of does a similar thing where you have like 4 action points and you can spend them in various ways, whether it's movement, attacking twice. That action point is also saved for your reaction if you want to act outside of your turn.
I'm not too bright, so I always try to break things down to its simplest form. And we grew up playing board games like Sorry and Monopoly, where it was your turn, you rolled dice, you did your thing, and you were done. And the moment that you played a game that changed that, or the moment that you teach someone else a game that changes that, you play Ticket to Ride, right? You only have one turn, but you can do these different things and you have to decide which things to do. Both of those types of games deliver a different experience. And the second is not necessarily better, but it is different and it does make you think in different ways. So I don't have a preference for one over the other, except to say that whatever you're trying to elicit in terms of the story that flows from it, may be served better by one or the other. I want the starter set to just have one action. I don't want them to tell new players, here's a bonus action, here's a reaction, here's movement, here's this, here's that. Because what you're doing is you're confusing those people who have only played Sorry
Sure.
and are not quite ready for Ticket to Ride yet. They need
let them move and attack. Let them move and attack. And that's
exactly.
Wait till they level up, and then they can have bonus reactions and stuff like that.
Precisely. So that's where my brain goes when I hear a question like this is, what's the audience? What are you trying to do? And use the system that best models the outcomes, the stories, the narratives that you're trying to pull out from gameplay.
I agree with Shawn, but I think I would express it differently. But I think you said something really interesting, Shawn. You basically said what I think. It's very telling. I don't think it is down to play style. I think it is down to category of game. Right? I think it's very telling that you used Sorry as an example, not Call of Cthulhu, right? So when we started we made, my company has made its own original role-playing game from scratch. It is not a fork of D20. It's its own thing. I am not here to promote it, so I have not mentioned its name or anything like that. But I thought in my dream RPG, if it had been literally just me working on it, no collaborators, I would have used an action point system. And when I talked about this online, people go, oh, like Pathfinder. And I'd be like, really? And then they would describe Pathfinder 2 to me. And I'm like, that is not an action point system, right? But the reason I like an action point system is because of a war game I played in the 90s, right? And in this war game, which is a squad-based game, so it's not like Warhammer 40K where you were controlling hundreds of miniatures. That's an epic scale game. It's not like Dungeons and Dragons where you're controlling basically one dude in a party of 5 or 6. That's a skirmish-based game. It's in between. It's squad-based. You are controlling 4 or 5 squads of between 1 and 12 people per squad. And in that game, each miniature, each model, as they call it, each model starts with 10 action points, and you can do whatever you want with them, right? And moving 1 square, moving 1 inch, because it's a miniature war game, not moving 1 inch costs 1 action point. And then you look at all of your weapons, right? All your spells. You're like, okay, I get it. It costs me 5 action points to fire the sniper rifle. Well, yeah, because the sniper rifle does an enormous amount of damage. So at best, you can shoot it twice, right? If you move at all, you can only shoot it once. And then you notice, oh, it has a reload. Yep, it's got a magazine size and a reload, and it costs to reload, right? And so it's up to you what you do with your squad, right? And I love that. I loved having that power over all my miniatures. Is I could I get it. This vibro dagger, because it's a sci-fi game, this vibro dagger only costs 1 action point to use, so I can make many attacks with it, and that offsets the fact, right, that it only does a little bit of damage. And then I can move to shoot this gun twice. I've got 1 action point left. I stab with my dagger. And you can create all these great combos. And I loved that, right? And I thought, yeah, let's do that in our new game. But very quickly, I was disabused of that notion. Role-playing games are not like war games, right? In fact, it's not obvious because war games are so big, right? They're so big that you control so many miniatures. But in point of fact, the problem set of a war game is drastically narrower than the problem set of a role-playing game. Role-playing games have the broadest possible action set. You can do anything you want. And so I think in a role-playing game, this is where it comes down to category, I think. It is good. It is good for the players to know I get to move and I get to attack, right? And I get maybe a third other action that I can trade this over, and that's it, right? That constraint is what makes a role-playing game playable, right? If you tried to deploy a completely free action system like the one I was imagining, you would hugely overload your players. And a single turn would take 10 minutes, as the player was trying to figure out exactly how to spend all their action points in the most efficient way possible. I've got 1 point left over. What do I do with it? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So it's the most efficient way possible. That is the mind killer.
Yeah.
It is.
Not fear.
I've done all this stuff. Wait, I still have a bonus action left.
Yeah.
Let me go through my 27 magic items and my subclasses. And is there a bonus action I can use?
Yep. Given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game.
Yeah. Yep. It's interesting to hear you both say that, because it's only been very, very limited so far, but that's kind of been my experience playing DC 20, which one of my players wanted to run, and they've changed it. It's based on 5e, kind of a fork, as you were describing before, Matt, but they've changed from action, bonus action, reaction, and movement to 4 action points, and you choose how you want to spend them.
Right, but you choose them to buy those actions, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's cool, and it kind of gives you options, but even just the simple thing of action, use 1 point to attack. You can attack a second time on your turn, but if you do, you have disadvantage on it to kind of balance out multi-attacking.
It's not like you could just attack 4 times and call it good. Yeah.
But
you could, but there are penalties. Yeah.
But if you spend 2 points on attacking, you can offset that by gaining advantage on the attack.
Yeah.
So then you're sitting there going like, I think I want to attack twice, but I still need to move away. Do I want to offset the disadvantage? And it's a cool, fun system, but it kind of really slows down the decision making.
But it is still grossly more constrained than the game than the war game I had played in the 90s.
Sure.
Right, where they have those same mechanics. It's just you spend 2 points, you spend 2 action points to aim. Right.
Yeah.
And it gives you a bonus on, because in other words, I'm giving up some movement. I'm staying still for a little while. So I get a bonus on this. It's very flexible. It's very powerful. I do not think that kind of system, which is not really what DC-20 sounds like. It just sounds like they're giving players a little bit more tactical control over a normal. And it all comes from 4th edition. I think actually it might all come from Hero Quest, as far as I know. That whole all of these Gloomhaven style, Descent style games are all move and attack, or attack and move, with usually a third minor thing you can do: open the door, drink a potion, that kind of stuff.
Sure. Yeah. The war game you're describing sounds kind of similar-ish to what Infinity does now, which is a skirmish game where
is that
each
the
unit
Corvus
generates.
Belly,
it is. Yeah.
It's by the way, lots of war games work like that. The one I played, was from FASA, which is a once mighty company that kind of sort of evolved into WizKids, called Vor the Maelstrom, which was their kind of Warhammer killer that did not kill Warhammer.
So I have a question. I know we're short on time. I have a question. Are there any games out there that sort of change the action economy round to round? So it sort of makes players change focus or change the way they think about the game.
You mean on different rounds you have access to different actions?
Possibly, or from round to round, even the system changes. So you have to think differently about the game itself.
It's a good question.
I'm not saying it would be a good game. I was just curious if anyone has tried it. And maybe they have, and that's why I haven't heard of it.
No, I mean, I can certainly imagine a game where depending on the scenario, right? As the scenario changes, your access to actions change, right? I haven't seen that, but that would be really interesting.
I mean, I've seen different circumstances. I've seen kind of the what do they call it? Evolve was this sort of game where it's one player is having that's what I'm thinking of. One player is having a vastly different experience to the others.
Yep. I don't want to be. I think that like our game has where I went to in my head was something like League of Legends, right? Where you have where you have like an ult that you have to wait, you have to build up to that thing. It is not it is an action that you have, but you do not have constant and ready access to it. Right. Our game works that way. There are things that you can only do on later rounds, right? Because they cost a lot of points, right? Sure. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure we've seen a game where it's like I almost feel like, Shawn, there would be a lot of really great dramatic and narrative opportunities there, right? Because if you watch any action movie, there are things the hero only does during certain points in certain scenes.
Yeah. And that's what I'm almost thinking. I'm thinking of there's a tactical round and then a narrative round. Something like that and then what happens in one round will change the way things happen in the next round. Your narrative round may change the actions that you could take in the tactical round. I'm like, my brain is frying. I'm designing in 30 seconds here, but that's where my mind went when I saw this question as well.
Look, I think that's what game designers should be thinking about, right? Hey, I've got an idea. Has any game work that done this before?
You sort of could an example of this be? I'm thinking of like playing Halo or Gears of War, these sort of shooters where, or even Fallout 4 kind of does this when you get into the power armor, although not as much. But like I'm thinking of Halo where you go up and you like rip the turret off a tripod and you're carrying the turret around. And suddenly you're out at third-person view instead of first-person view, and all you can do is move slowly and fire this turret, and it's a much more powerful gun, but you're making yourself a much more vulnerable target, and that's kind of the trade-off. But the game in those moments does feel different. Or even, to use Halo again, jumping on a ghost or getting in a warthog, you're kind of playing a different game suddenly.
Right? Is that those games, those kind of third-person shooters, like GTA, or I worked on a couple of them called Mercenaries, where the designers on purpose gatekeep, right, the access to vehicles, because getting in a vehicle changes the action economy, right? And they gatekeep them to certain dramatically appropriate moments. And so that's a great example. We should I should make a note of this. I happen to have my own game in my pocket that we could kind of deploy that in adventures and stuff, you know?
Yeah, well, somebody noted in the chat Cyberpunk, which my mind went to the video game because that's what I've played. But now I'm wondering, does the tabletop game have a tangible difference between like hacking and doing, I know they've got a special word for it in that game, and like combat? And can those two things be happening at the same time?
Well,
I've never played the tabletop version, so I'm not sure. But,
I'm not sure either, but that's a good question.
Somebody in the chat called out Torg.
Yeah, Torg.
Which is a very old game that had a drama deck where when things got really dramatic and you needed step by step, you would flip cards that would change the situation and change the way that you had to deal with it.
Yeah, Torg is a classic from West End Games. I think I think there is still an edition of it that is currently being supported. And it was the first time I, as a player, this would have been the late 80s, early 90s. It was the first time I, as a player, saw a game. I'm sure there were other games like this, but I hadn't played them, where the players could take dramatic control of a scene away from the director. Yep, and I was like, oh, this is cool. Like literally there was a card that was like, that's not how that happened.
Right.
That you could play to trump whatever the director was doing. And I was like, ooh, and it kind of made my game designer neurons fire.
Cool.
On that note.
On that note.
Some ways are better than others, folks.
Welcome to the Lorecast, Matt.
I mean, look, they can't all be home runs.
No, that's true. Well, on that note, let us wrap this up because we are over time, as we mentioned before.
Well, what if we weren't? There's a bunch of great questions. Anyway, sorry.
I wish.
It's your podcast.
Yes, unfortunately, we need to go and do some game designing, but there are great questions. If you want to email podcast@ghostfiregaming.com, I will take them. I will read them out to our panel. We will answer them to the best of our abilities. Or you can catch us on Twitch, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on a Monday, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, or it's 9 a.m. Tuesday, Australian Eastern Time, if you happen to be over the pond, mate. Or you catch us on YouTube. Likes, stars, all that stuff helps get us out to more listeners. So thank you very much for listening. Matt, thanks for joining us. Where can folks find you? You do quite a bit of streaming if folks want to catch up with you online.
Yeah, I'm on Twitch, but I'm on Twitch on purpose so that people don't find me. If I streamed on YouTube, I'm on Twitter @MattColville.com and just Twitter @MattColville, which is I disappoint a lot of people because I almost never talk about gaming. I talk about music and movies and cats and just about everything else. So, but if you want to follow me, I'm on Twitter @MattColville.
Nice. And of course, you can find us here. We will be back next week for another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. I've been Ben Byrne here with Shawn Merwin, Matt Colville, and we will be back again next week.
Peace out.
Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba.